Welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, May 2nd, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the Republican Party and this expectation that they came into the 2024 election of potentially a red wave year, and how Mitch McConnell, the Senate minority leader actually, the chair essentially of the Republican Senate wing here, is now downplaying the chances of the Republican Party's victories for this coming November, in stark contrast with the Republicans having high estimations and high expectations for themselves that they have set out in both the 2020 presidential election, but also the 2022 midterm elections. Now, Mitch McConnell coming out and saying the Republican Party here is expecting to not do as well as they may have predicted maybe 6, 7, 8 months ago is something that really doesn't come much of a surprise. The 2024 Senate elections have been ones that we have been so closely watching, largely because there are so many key and crucial battleground states for this upcoming November. And right now, the Senate majority is very, very slim, with Democrats at 51 seats and Republicans at 49. The Democrats in 2020 also won the Senate majority 50-50 here, and based on the map we're looking at, Democrats currently have 7 incumbents that are vulnerable in some of the most competitive states. Republicans also have the benefit here of immediately getting a pickup in the state of West Virginia, as Joe Manchin, the incumbent senator here, has decided to retire and not run for re-election. And with that, West Virginia being the most conservative state in the country, voting for Donald Trump by over 40 points in both 2016 and 2020 here, this means that this state automatically becomes a GOP pickup. And so that at baseline brings the Republicans to 50 seats. None of the other states are expected to be widely competitive, with maybe, and I say maybe as a long shot here, the exception of Texas as a competitive Senate race. The Democrats, on the other hand, only seem to have 43 seats that really are safe and secured. And now with the intrusion of Governor Larry Hogan entering the race in the state of Maryland, there is some consideration that that seat might be competitive, but genuinely speaking, we know the Democrats are going to win there. And so in the 7 remaining states here, you would think, just based on this math alone, Republicans already have a pickup here, meaning that if they win control of the presidency, they win control of the U.S. Senate. And while that may be true, there is a reason why Republicans at 50 seats here are still downplaying their chances at winning in a red wave year. What we know about this election cycle is that, generally speaking, it should be a slam dunk for the GOP. President Biden is unpopular with a 39% approval rating. He's lower than where President Trump was 4 years ago today, and the numbers just don't seem to be getting better for President Biden month after month after month. And yet with that, the Democratic Party remains to be the consistent party when it comes down to candidate quality, candidate fundraising, and candidate odds, especially when it comes down to the U.S. Senate. The most recent set of polls from Emerson College here seem to suggest that while Donald Trump may have the advantage in states like Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, Democrats have the upper hand when it comes down to the Senate races. Pretty much in every race besides the presidential, the Democrats have the upper hand, whether it's down-ballot House races, Senate races, gubernatorial races, state legislative races. The Democrats actually have a very strong chance at victory in so many different competitive fields in this November election. And so the Republican Party, especially in the Senate, is acknowledging that, at least internally here. Mitch McConnell, in an interview, seems to be suggesting that the Republicans are actually focused on just a few key states. They aren't trying to go as big and bold as they did in 2022, and he even directly cites that as a reason why they are trying to rescale their strategy, trying to make this more of a focused and concerted effort rather than sporadic funding and, allocation of resources that ultimately result in losses in a number of these competitive states. When you take a look at the Senate election results from 2022, these were not the expected Senate results that the GOP had thought that they were going to get. Quite frankly, the Republican Party was expecting 2022 to be a red wave year. And it wasn't just the Senate elections that let them down. I mean, you can take a look at the governor races too, where Republicans lost in a number in key and crucial battleground states like Arizona or Kansas or Maine or Michigan or New Mexico, or even states like Oregon that surprisingly became more competitive. Republicans were very hopeful, ultimately fell flat on their faces. Same thing with states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Republicans at one point in time thought they might be able to genuinely win those states and ultimately did not. When it comes down to the House races too, the Republican Party was widely expecting 40, 50 seats in terms of pickups. President Biden's approval rating was almost as low as it was now, and just generally speaking, it wasn't a good year for Democrats. They were losing the generic ballot for the first time since 2014, and Republicans ended up actually winning the generic ballot when it came down to the House election results. And yet the Democrats ultimately came out ahead in the Senate races, the governor races here, and held on to a significant number of their toss-up seats on the election here. And what we know from even in the 2020 election is that every single most competitive district from the 2020 House elections went to the Republican Party. In 2022, however, the majority of them went to the Democrats. And so looking at this, revisionist strategy based off what happened in 2016, 2018, 2020, and 2022, the Republican Party seems to have caught on that they were overexerting themselves, that they were allowing so many of these races to be seemingly competitive because at face value, they should have been, absolutely. But then when they look back on it and realize that in all of their losses, maybe they were spread too thin. They also recognize the very real reality here that their candidates are just not up to par with what they should be. The fact is, Donald Trump is outperforming the Republican Party not only when it comes down to swing states, but also on the national margin here. When we take a look at the generic ballot, when it comes down to between Democrats and Republicans, Democrats lead here by 1.4%. It's the first time Democrats have led in months here, and it will be a topic of conversation in a future video, 100%. But my takeaway, I want you to see this, is that American voters, while they may preference Donald Trump against Joe Biden, preference Democrats practically everywhere else. And you can also see it in the swing states too. It isn't just Emerson College, it is the clear consensus in these states. For instance, in Arizona, on average, in the four most recent polls, Donald Trump leads by 5 points across the state. In the Senate race, Ruben Gallego leads by 6. That's an 11-point spread difference between the Republican support and Democratic support. That's super substantial. That means there are Trump voters out there that are voting for Democrats down the ballot, not only on the Senate races here, but you also see it in some of the congressional polling that we see in states like Arizona. When we move over to other states, for instance, like Wisconsin, where Trump's lead is a bit more narrower, a 1.8% advantage, the lead for Democrats expands to roughly 5 points. Again, this is a huge difference between the amount of support that we're seeing for Joe Biden on the presidential, 47%, that we're seeing for Democrats on the Senate level, 49%, that is bringing us to a spread of a 5-point victory. And keep in mind, Democrats won these seats in past elections. In 2018, Kyrsten Sinema defeated her Republican opponent there, Martha McSally, by roughly 2.4%. In 2018, we saw Tammy Baldwin win in this race by over 10 percentage points. And so it isn't that shocking that Democrats are ahead. But it goes to show that even with this Trump lead here, the premise of this article too is that Mitch McConnell seems to suggest that the better that the president does, President Trump being the president there, the better that the president does, the better their odds are at winning these races. And while that absolutely is true here, you are seeing a significant change in support when it comes down to Senate, House, gubernatorial elections than you see on the presidential. And sometimes they don't directly translate. And this election seems to be very different than some of the ones we've seen in the past. Nevada, too, a state that Donald Trump leads by 4.5%. We see in the Senate race here that Jackie Rosen leads by 7 points across the state on average. In a state like Michigan, which is a lot closer, the closest I would say of them all for Senate Democrats here, Donald Trump leads Joe Biden by 1.2%. Elisa Slotkin only leads by roughly 1 point, but has led in 3 out of the 4 most recent polls, and the only one she didn't lead in was a tie. And we move over to the final state here, Pennsylvania. Trump leads by 1, Bob Casey leads by 6 here, a clear and consistent trend that largely leads the Republican Party to recognize that the chances of a red wave are actually a lot slimmer than they otherwise might think. Because what we know, too, from previous elections is that Donald Trump does not actually perform as good as down-ballot Republicans. For instance, in some of these states like Pennsylvania, Donald Trump won the state by 0.7, but Pat Toomey won by 1.4. In Wisconsin, Ron Johnson won by 3.4, Donald Trump won by 0.6. In Arizona, Donald Trump won by 3.5. John McCain won by 13. In North Carolina, Donald Trump won by 3.7. Richard Burr won by 5.7. In Georgia, Donald Trump won by 5.2. Johnny Isakson won by 13.8. In Florida, Donald Trump won by 1.1. Marco Rubio won by 7.7. And it happened again in 2020. Tom Tillis won by 1.7. Donald Trump won by 1.3. In Michigan, Joe Biden won the state by 2.8. Republicans here lost it by 1.7. That is a reduction in support. In states across this country, too, You very rarely found that Republicans saw an overperformance. In the places that they did, the down ballot Republicans, saw an underperformance. In the places that they did, places like Iowa, where Joni Ernst underperformed Donald Trump. In Montana, where the incumbent popular Democratic governor ran for the Senate race here. But generally speaking, these down ballot Republicans often perform better. And the fact is, that is not happening this election. And in the same groups of voters here, these Emerson College polls are the clearest that we can see, where they are asking the same electorate, the same bases here, that are voting on a presidential, that they're choosing Trump by 4 in Arizona, but Gallego by 2, where they're choosing Trump by 2 in Pennsylvania, but Bob Casey by 4, where they're choosing Trump by 1 in Nevada, but Jackie Rosen by 8. And so I think what we really need to understand too here is that the Republican Party is trying to adapt their strategy because they are recognizing that that might be their reality, where you are seeing a severe underperformance on the behalf of Republicans in these down ballot races here. And that's a very bad sign, because in this adaptation of their strategy here, they probably aren't going to get that much better. Because when you actually take a look at the states that they're targeting, you might even laugh at the inclusion of some of these states here. So Mitch McConnell says you take the polls around Labor Day and just begin to decide where you're going to play. Entirely fair point, right? The election doesn't really ramp up into full force until after Labor Day, because that's the prime time that American voters are paying attention to the ballot box. And I do agree, to an extent at least. I don't think Ruben Gallego is going to win the Senate race in Arizona by 8 points. I don't think we're going to see Democrats slam dunk the Republicans in all of these states if Donald Trump is winning. But do I think that they have a chance at winning it? And do I think they are likely to win it even if Donald Trump wins the state? Absolutely here. But the Republican strategy is to focus on what they need to focus on right now. To focus on the states that are swing states like Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and surprisingly enough, even Maryland here. And it looks like Mitch McConnell seems to be narrowing down this strategy from all of the states mentioned down to 4 crucial states: Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. Now, don't get me wrong. Larry Hogan is a strong candidate. Larry Hogan won re-election in 2018 by a strong margin. He won by roughly 10 points, and I will say, that's really good, obviously, for a Republican in a state like Maryland. But I will say, a nationalized Senate race is very different than a local gubernatorial race. This race here in Maryland, the consequences of it only extended to Annapolis. The consequences of a Senate race for a Republican to win would extend to the halls of Congress. Hear me when I say this. I made a video on it when it first happened. Maryland will not be competitive. Larry Hogan will narrow down the race and still lose by double digits. Angela Alsobrooks or David Trone will will be, one of them two, the next senator from the state of Maryland. And now it looks more likely than not that it's going to be somebody like Angela Alsobrooks. And so when you see that, and this is my home state too, so I have a unique passion for it, I want us to steer clear of the idea that Maryland is going to be competitive. Because this is the one time I will say with full certainty, I don't believe a single thing about the polls that we are seeing from that state. Because name ID is everything now, but I can guarantee you this. Voters in states like Maryland are very similar to the voters that we saw in states like Montana in 2020, where you saw that in the down ballot race for the presidential, Trump won by 16. But on the Senate level, a popular Democratic incumbent, Steve Bullock, he was the Democratic governor at the time who won his race, might I add, in 2016 on the same ballot as Donald Trump ran for the Senate race. And while he did narrow it up, ultimately lost by 10 points. Expect something very similar there. And so when I see Mitch McConnell mention a state like Maryland as a for sure play, my confidence in his strategy decreases even more. Not only did I think it was a bit weird to take 2022, and the takeaway was that, we need to go ahead and narrow our scope here and not recognize that maybe they were spread too thin because their candidates just simply weren't strong and couldn't get the resources to actually build a robust NRCC campaign or NRSC campaign. That's a separate conversation. But the idea that the focus should be on 4 states when there are so many opportunities, and you include a state like Maryland that I don't even personally consider to be a key state. He mentions Ohio, Montana, and Pennsylvania. Well, I'm telling you this now. Pennsylvania is less competitive than Michigan or Wisconsin. Ohio, Montana, Pennsylvania, I guess in theory they could be grouped in as long as you're including states like Wisconsin and Michigan. Arizona should be there before Pennsylvania. Nevada should be there before Pennsylvania. Michigan, Wisconsin should be there before Pennsylvania. And so I think the Republican priorities right now are a bit jumbled. I don't think they know a direct course of action that they are going to take to combat the fact that they have weak candidates like Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, that they have people like Bernie Moreno in states like Ohio, right, where you have people like Carrie Lake in Arizona. I don't think they've been able to feel out exactly how they're going to combat something like that. So they're trying to narrow their scope to focus their resources and their energy on states that, quite frankly, are not going to be as favorable to them as they otherwise might think. Pennsylvania and Maryland should not be on that top 4 list. And I would draw it very differently if I was a Republican operative. But I'm not. And so when I see things like this, I think we can comment on it that it is true. The Republicans should begin to start downplaying the chances of a red wave. Because based on where the GOP is right now, I do not think that is the likeliest outcome of this election. Despite the Senate map being the most beneficial the Republican Party could have out of any of the 3 Senate maps in a year that should be the most beneficial. The Republican Party, yet again, as they showed us in 2018, 2020, and 2022, exactly how, within their reach, they could lose their chance at victory. Well within their reasonable grasp at it, they lose victory to the Democratic Party. And a lot of it has to do with the own Republican Party. Who they're nominating, how they're campaigning, who is representing them not only on the campaign trail, but also on the national level. In this case, it's Donald Trump. And ultimately, I think we are going to see that in many of these states, many of these primary choices, many of these investment choices are going to backfire on the Republican Party, and Democrats will ultimately come out ahead, which is exactly what they're gearing up and preparing the optics for, because they know it's coming. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.